Any questions about this simple, focused technique of meditation? Choose something, pay attention to it, keep coming back to it over and over. That's your answer, whatever your question is. Keep coming back to it over and over if you want to concentrate. Concentration's your goal. And concentration is our topic tonight because, as I said in the beginning, I've been doing a series of teachings on Monday nights that is the Buddha's core teaching, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path. The little review is the first noble truth is the acknowledgement that we're all in this together. We're all having this human experience that includes suffering, difficulty, unease, unhappiness, dissatisfaction, normalizing the human condition, and that it's something that's universal that we all share. And that most of our suffering is created by craving, this impersonal, repetitive craving that's part of our survival instinct, that's part of the animal-human body, and that makes life stressful because it's never pleasant long enough, and it's always painful some of the time, and that craving for pleasure is repetitive. It's not like you just can satisfy a craving and then you're good. You satisfy it, and then it's like, hey, yeah, I want more. I want something different. It's constant part of our human experience on one level or another, whether that's craving for sense pleasures or craving for things to be more permanent, last longer, or craving for the third form of craving is craving for non-existence. When life is difficult and painful, that feeling of like, I just don't want to deal with this shit at all, but I'm stuck in it. I don't want to exist. And makes life hard to bear at times. And then the third truth, which is you can end all of that shit through your own efforts in this lifetime. If you want to get free, you can get free if you're willing to do the work to experience training your mind like we're doing in meditation, to end this identification with the repetitive craving. I'm not sure that we get rid of the instinctual drives towards pleasure and away from pain, but meditation, this path, changes our relationship to pleasure and pain and craving and self-centeredness so radically that what the Buddha said was that I came to a place of no more suffering. Still very human, not a god, not magic, not just a person who has a wise relationship to their own mind, to their own body, that is awake to reality as it is, no longer stuck in the self-centered delusion of thinking I'll be happy when I get, knowing that that's always a lie. The mind constantly tells us that, and it's never true. And when we wake up more, like the Buddha woke up and he said, oh, that's just a confused part of the human condition, not to be trusted, not to be believed. To understand that happiness doesn't come from satisfying cravings. The fourth truth is if you want that freedom, if you want that happiness, if you want nirvana, what we call nirvana, awakening, do this eightfold path. Here's the instructions that will get us free. And we spent the last 8 weeks talking about that one at a time. Understanding karma, aligning our intentions with positive karma-producing intentions. Being careful with our speech and communication. Being careful with our actions, renunciation, the 5 precepts. being careful with our relationship to being awake to all of the karma we're creating in our relationship to money and livelihood. How that repetitive craving can become greed, can become dishonesty, can become, get us into a livelihood situation that's based on the delusion that money is more important than happiness, or the bigger delusion that money equals happiness. And then we start to say, like, any way that I can get money. So the Buddha talks about livelihood and that factor on the path. And then effort and all of the effort that it takes to walk this path, to meditate, to develop the discipline of meditation, the discipline of renunciation, showing up to community, even if you don't want to, even if you've heard this talk 1,000 times. I was talking to a friend earlier, like the encouragement to come to Sangha isn't just to learn, because you've heard it, you read the books. It's you come here to connect with each other, to be part of a community, to have relationships with other meditators. Last week we went over the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is our core practice in this form of Buddhism. And tonight's topic is the 8th factor of the path, which is concentration. Concentration meditations. And the simple difference is concentration is focusing on one thing, excluding everything else. Mindfulness ultimately is inclusive. You're not ignoring. In mindfulness, there's no such thing as a distraction. In concentration, you can be distracted from your chosen object. Now, some would say distracting situations are actually good for developing concentration. People talking next door, whoever was fucking with the lift and the stairs, the traffic, all of those things. Because actually, when you hear that, or your mind, it forces you to come back and focus more precisely on the chosen object. That if actually when it's really quiet, sometimes you can really drift off. But if there's other things going on, I had a teacher who said, the ideal concentration job for somebody who wants to get really concentrated might be working in a factory, in a very repetitive job where you're just doing the same thing, but there's all of this going on and you just have to focus. Putting it in the box, putting it in the box, putting it in the box. You get super fucking concentrated, putting it in the box. So the Buddha includes this, and the concentration, they're called the absorptions, and there's 4 levels of absorptions, also called jhanas, the 4 jhanas. I'm going to give you a little, and this is one of my least favorite talks to give, because I don't know that much about the jhanas, and let me tell you why. Because I was taught, trained by Buddhists who have been pretty dismissive of the jhanas. And there's a couple of reasons why. One of the reasons, and it's if you look in the suttas, if you look in early Buddhist texts, it's everywhere. There's a lot of teachings about the jhanas. The Buddha clearly was talking about this in his life. He was clearly teaching it. If you look at the oldest scriptures, teachings. But about 100 years ago or so, I think there's always been debates about how much concentration is necessary. And part of the backstory here is that the Buddha learned these concentration techniques and they didn't lead him to enlightenment. It wasn't until he found mindfulness, until he discovered this technique of present time inclusive awareness, that he got liberated. So that fact in itself makes a lot of us say, like, this concentration doesn't work. The Buddha mastered concentration and said it did not liberate him from the core causes of suffering. So he himself was a bit dismissive of it. But then later said it doesn't work by itself, but it does work very well in conjunction with mindfulness. If you can have a concentrated mind and then turn towards this open, investigative, present time awareness, you're much more likely to have transformative insights. Make sense? So about 100 years ago, from what I understand, a lot of the Buddhists were arguing, as we have been for centuries from the beginning, but they were arguing about, there was this big thing, especially in Theravadan Buddhism, which is my lineage, about how important is concentration. What's the most important thing about this path? What's going to get us free? And this argument of concentration versus mindfulness, jhanas versus vipassana, insight, mindfulness practice. And there was a big gathering of all the highest meditation masters at the time, especially in the Theravada. I think there was some Mahayana and Vajrayana teachers there too. And it was one of these big Buddhist councils, and all of the highest and the people who had memorized all of the teachings. And as the story goes, there was a man named Mahasi Sayadaw who won the argument in Burma. And he was this Burmese meditation master. And, they get together and maybe they vote or something. They kind of come together and say, all right, who's making the most sense here? And then there was this conclusion, Mahasi is making the most sense. He knows the suttas the best. He's got the best argument for what we should be doing in our Buddhist practice, what we should be focusing on. And his conclusion was the 4 foundations of mindfulness, vipassana practice, was the most important part, and you didn't need to do the jhanas. And he pulled out all of the things in the suttas where the Buddha says, you don't need to go into the jhanas. You just need to do vipassana. And, spiritual scriptures are really easy to cherry pick. Have you noticed? You can make the Bible say whatever you want. You can make Buddhism also say whatever you want to some extent. You just choose this here and this here and make your argument for, well, he said this once. The Buddhism that we get in the Western insight Theravadan Buddhism mostly influenced by 2 teachers, I think, Mahasi Sayadaw and Ajahn Chah in this lineage, in the Thai forest tradition and in the Burmese tradition. So all of the senior Western teachers were influenced by Mahasi, who was dismissive of the jhanas. Even the stuff that the first wave of Buddhist meditation for Westerners, like Ram Dass's Be Here Now. Some of you read that on acid? Ram Dass was influenced by the Mahasi method. He was in India and he met Manindra and Goenka, who were Mahasi lineage students. Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, they were all Mahasi Sayadaw. So this guy that won the argument then became kind of controlled the narrative, especially for the Western students as we've developed Western Buddhism. And so 30 years ago when I started practicing, I was kind of given this, like, don't worry about concentration. Never heard Dharma talks on concentration, never do mindfulness. This is the real deal. This is what is going to liberate you. So I haven't studied it that much, and that's why I don't love giving the talk about it. And who knows what the Buddha really taught? My sense is that they say one of the reasons that the Buddha was a one of his special skills as an enlightened person, is that he could meet you and be like, this is what you need to do. You need to learn concentration. And then he meets somebody else and be like, you're concentrated enough. You need to learn mindfulness. You're mindful and concentrated enough. A lot of forgiveness for you. And then he would sort of tailor a lot of what he said to the people or the person that he was dialoguing with. And then it becomes religion and becomes scripture and becomes, this is how you're supposed to practice Buddhism. Who knows how the fuck we're supposed to practice Buddhism? What we know is we have all of these different lists and teachings and the Burmese opinion and the Tibetan opinion and the, Thai forest, perspective. We have all of these, and sometimes very conflicting. Isn't it a little confusing? You read a Zen book, and then you read a Tibetan book, and then you read a Theravada book, and you're like, this is all Buddhism? They seem like they're talking about some different shit. These guys say, don't study at all, just face the wall. These guys say you have to memorize everything. You have to learn it. Over here it says, concentrate your ass off. Over here it says, concentration's a waste of time. Be mindful. Don't worry about it. So I was raised by Buddhists who were pretty dismissive of concentration, I believe. But the more you meditate, even if you're not trying to get concentrated, I don't know how many of you have done long silent retreats. How many of you have done 10 days or more? The rest of you need to as soon as possible. Because even if you're not trying to get concentrated, when you go into silence and you're meditating, sitting and walking and doing meditation practice all day, you get concentrated. And something that I think is useful about talking about and studying concentration is that then you have a map of like, oh, this is concentration. This is what happens. Now I'll give you some of the classic descriptions of the 4 jhanas. So when you get concentrated enough to enter into the first jhana, which is access concentration, there is thinking born of detachment filled with rapture and happiness. I don't know if you've had this experience yet, but sometimes you'll be meditating and there'll just be an overwhelming sense of joy, of rapture, this what's called sukha, and a piti. Sukha is spiritual happiness, and this it's called gladdening of the heart and the mind. And it happens all by itself. It's like a spiritual orgasm with no source other than your meditation. And you just have these big, joyous, beautiful experiences born of concentration. Now they're impermanent, they arise and they pass. The cause of that joy, on some level, is that when you're really concentrated, the 5 hindrances, the 5 things that are often taking us out of the present, and those 5 hindrances are craving. Notice that. How many times did your mind tonight, while you're trying to focus on your breath, take you off into some desire, some craving, some story about? When you're really concentrated, there's this like seclusion, this protection from craving, and also a protection from aversion, ill will, resentment. So often when we're meditating, the mind gets into past argument, resentment, judgment. When you're really concentrating, you're really ignoring your mind, and then you can ignore the hindrances. So craving, ill will, restlessness, anxiety, torpor, and doubt are all at bay when you're concentrated enough that you no longer are experiencing craving or aversion, restlessness or worry. And it's not even that the mind isn't producing those things. Maybe it isn't, But more likely, you're just ignoring the mind so thoroughly that you're not troubled by these 5 hindrances, by doubts. And when you're not troubled by those, joy arises. Because those are the things that are hindering this natural rapture, this natural joy, this natural feeling of gratitude and appreciation that's part of the human heart-mind, part of our capacity that often we don't tap into because we're so much in our head, stuck in the craving and aversion and self-centeredness and doubts and fears. But when you get concentrated, that's what happens. This absorption is free from 5 things, and 5 things are present. When the disciple enters into the first absorption, there have vanished the 5 hindrances: lust, ill will, torpor, sloth, restlessness, mental worry, and doubts. There are present thought conception, discursive thinking, rapture, happiness, and concentration. The way that this is vitaka and vikara, it's that focused ability of mind. I was reading some things earlier thinking about this. And the author was saying, we all know that experience of being so focused. Often you know it when you're really focused on like unwholesome things. Like, you ever been just so mad at somebody that you're just picking them apart and you're so focused in that anger and that hatred and you're just obsessed with like, fuck them. And you see everything that's wrong with them and a whole story about them. You get real concentrated in resentment. Or in the midst of some fantasy lust or something, you're so concentrated. And what that author was saying was that this is the kind of, that sort of focused attention, but not towards some anger or some lust, but just towards the nature of the present moment. Just really interested, really present with the truth of impermanence, the truth of the impersonal nature of what's happening, not self. So first factor. And then the rest is just a kind of refinement. In the second absorption, there are 3 factors of absorption: rapture, happiness, and concentration. So the thought starts to go away, not so much aware of that mind at all, kind of disappearing, dissolving of thoughts at all, and just an experience of rapture, just an experience of sukha, of this spiritual happiness. In the third absorption, equanimity, equanimous happiness, upekkha sukha, and this concentrated, single-pointed. Now, all that remains is this very spacious, open, joyous state of being. In the fourth absorption, there are 2 factors: just equanimity, no more sukha. The joy of it goes away, and it's just an open, spacious equanimity, equanimous state of spacious mind. No suffering. Sounds good, right? You want some joy and rapture and happiness? Concentrate your ass off. Now here's the problem. And so let me just back up, and I said it already, but the Buddha experienced this. When he went on his search for enlightenment, he found teachers that taught him how to concentrate. They gave him mantra practice. They gave him these repetitive focus practices in the Brahmanic Hindu tradition. And he said, I had these experiences of joy. I had this bliss body, dissolving of self. I mastered these techniques, and it was a lot of fun. But when I wasn't meditating, when I wasn't that concentrated, the causes of my unhappiness returned. The causes of human suffering, of dukkha, the first noble truth, came back when I wasn't concentrated. I was craving again. I was aversive again. The 5 hindrances returned. I was taking it all personal. And he made the decision. He said, I don't want a spiritual experience that allows me to temporarily avoid the causes of suffering. I want a spiritual awakening that ends the causes of suffering. Not avoidance, but transformation, awakening. And it's why he ultimately rejected solely concentration-based practices, and why he discovered mindfulness. And I can see in my own experience and in so many people's experiences, it comes back to, why are you meditating? Do you want to get high? Or do you want to get free? And I think a lot of people should just be humble enough to be like, I want to get high. I'm trying to get off of dope, and I want to get high still. So I want to get concentrated, and maybe there's nothing wrong with what a wholesome sense of getting high. A meditative-based experience of bliss and joy, and you don't go to jail for it. It's great. But if we really want to get free, we have to take it beyond just concentrating. And we have to, and especially if you're like me or an addict and a human being that has craving for pleasure, a lot of people get stuck in spiritual practices that feel good. Oh, I want to do that. I want to concentrate because it feels good, because I crave pleasure. I crave it. And now I'm turning my meditation practice into a new form of seeking pleasant experience rather than seeking liberation. Because ultimately what we know is that pain is unavoidable. You can't meditate your way away from it. You can't. So we have to have a meditation practice that includes teaching us how to be in pain, with pain, to have compassion for pain. And that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness shows us clearly the truth of impermanence. When you're concentrated, you don't know about impermanence. You're ignoring impermanence. You're resting in that joyous equanimity. But you can easily slip into denial about impermanence and the transient nature and the repetitive nature of craving and our pleasure and our craving for pleasure. I do wish that my teachers had taught me a little bit more about the jhanas. I was doing, about a decade ago, I did a long retreat, a 3-month retreat. And in my 30s, I did a bunch of intense, in my 20s and 30s, I did a bunch of intense practice. And I was having these experiences of the jhanas, but my teachers weren't really telling me what they were. And I was having this joy coming up, and I was having this equanimity and this dissolving of self and no thought and no body, and all of that shit was happening because I was in retreat for months. And they were just saying, okay, keep going, keep paying attention. But there's something interesting when you learn what the Buddha taught about this, that you can actually play with it. You can say, oh, too much concentration. Let me pull back and turn towards mindfulness. I'm getting a little too concentrated. It's a little too pleasant. I'm getting a little too attached to it. Let me pull back to a more grounded mindfulness so that I can actually turn towards the impermanence and the pain and meet it with compassion. But you see how you wouldn't really want to do that, right? Like, this is amazingly pleasant, but it's not getting me free. And always coming back to, I want to be free. I want to see clearly and learn to respond wisely. So in some ways, Here, let me land here. Some would say you need to do these 4 jhanas, get that concentrated. Some would say, and what I was mostly taught, was that you don't have to be that concentrated. You need to be about as concentrated as it takes to read a paragraph in a book and not lose your place. You know how sometimes you read the same sentence over and over, or you read that whole paragraph and you were thinking about something else, you weren't concentrating, and you have to go back and read it over? But it's not a very high bar to just be present enough to be like, I read that paragraph and I comprehended it. And now I'm moving on to the next paragraph. Some would say if you're concentrated enough to read and comprehend what you've read, you're concentrated enough to do vipassana, mindfulness, 4 foundations. Some would say you have to be so concentrated that you no longer are aware that you have a mind or body. What book? What mind? What paragraph? I tend to land, and most of my experience has been low level of concentration, except for on some of those longer retreats. And the transformation that I've experienced based on applying mindfulness with a low level of concentration. It's mostly what I teach you. We don't do a lot of concentration in here. We're doing mindfulness. Using the breath as an anchor, I think gets us concentrated enough. First 5 or 10 minutes of our instructions is come back to the breath, come back to the breath. Now open up. Concentrated enough. Now open to the 2nd foundation, to the 3rd foundation, to the 4th. Is my view. What are your questions about this 8th factor of the Eightfold Path, or anything else that this talk brings up for you? Please.
You mentioned impermanence a few times, and I have the definition for it myself, but I was curious to know what your definition of impermanence was.
Can I borrow yours?
Sure.
Everything changes. Nothing is static, solid, or continuous. And so I'm talking about mind states and sensations and emotions and externals, that there's a process of transience in the mind and in the body and in the world. Nothing stays the same. Everything is changing all the time.
And embracing that, you're saying?
Seeing it clearly. Accepting it. Yeah, on some level embracing it, but don't embrace it too tight, right? Because all of Buddhism is saying everything's impermanent. Don't cling to anything, because when you cling to impermanent experiences, you suffer. So a non-attached embracing or awareness, or I like to think of like living, what's it mean to live in harmony with impermanence? It means to be not attached. And then impermanence has good news and bad news. When it's really painful, it's good news. When it's really pleasant, not such good news. But living in harmony with it, and when it's pleasant, I like to talk about non-attached appreciation. That's the goal. Enjoy it, soak it up, feel it, but don't cling to it. But appreciate it, enjoy it. You don't have to avoid pleasure. Just you have to stop trying to keep it. Which is easier said than done. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Thank you. Go on, please.
That issue about concentration and mindfulness, and the fact that historically I know it's been kind of pushed aside by a lot of the American Theravada convert community.
Yeah. And the Theravada,
within the Burmese,
especially in the Burmese,
it seems to be fuzzy when you talk about when we talk about type 4s, because I've met people who practiced at Meta, I've met people who practiced in Thailand, and it seems like it seems to be more balanced. They seem to be not so against it as we see in the Burmese Mahasasaya, etc.
Yeah.
And of course, we also see as a response to that, we see a lot of teachers here put a lot of emphasis on metta as a concentration practice to kind of make up the balance because they run into negative shit when they've been practicing. In the last few months, I've noticed that firsthand, if you have a really strong negative bias, especially if you've had a lot of negative shit happen in your life over the last few years, I know I have. I was clinically depressed for a while, etc. I've recently found that a lot of concentration practice, I mean, I think it should be not reevaluated, but it gives you the possibility of something positive, a positive chitta, without having to get wasted, loaded, what have you.
Yes.
You know, and I think that it definitely serves a purpose there. And yes, on the one hand, you don't want to get addicted to it. On the other hand, some people really need to feel that positive thing. I sometimes wish there's more people teaching Johnny's side of it for that reason.
Yeah.
Because the little I've stumbled across and doing like a lot of metta has been very positive. Secondly, fairly recently I found that I'm finally beginning to get like continuity mindfulness is one thing. Sometimes you go on retreat, as long as I've been doing 8 days. This probably the 10-day one. 8 days of misery. Watching all the shit that were running down, through my head, shame, anger, rage, what have you, deep resentment, loss, grief. But the more concentration work I've done, the more I seem to be able to have a better distance on this and be, one of the things that always mystified me, especially in Mahayana, like welcoming your demons, giving them tea, giving them a hug, I'm finally beginning to see that.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it has to do with having done a lot of either straight concentration on the breath or a lot of that.
Yeah.
In recent months.
Yeah.
And then, I'm really beginning to wonder what Mahasayam, Vikandita, what are they thinking? That's just what
I think it is being rethought. And, 20, 30 years ago, very few of the Western teachers were talking about it. And then, I don't know, a decade or so ago, Richard Shankman wrote a great book on concentration. Lee Brazington is a Dharma teacher who was in me and Trudy's Dharma teacher training and teaches jhana retreats. I've sat jhana retreats with him. He was trained by a German nun named Ayakema. And, so concentration, jhana has become a bit more popularized, certainly than it was 20, 30 years ago in the Western Buddhist scene.
You shit like Catherine, who's been teaching online courses.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us that have been meditating for a long time started to get a little bored with mindfulness and like, well, what is this jhana stuff? It's okay to get high once in a while and experience some absorptions. I think it's shifting. There's more access to jhana teachings now.
Do you think that's part of the same trend where people are talking about psychedelics again? Mm-hmm. Practice is connected in some way?
Could be. Western Buddhism was founded by a bunch of drugged out hippies that like altered states. So, makes sense that there's all of this curiosity about altered states. Ram Dass and all of those guys was like half of the spiritual experiences were on LSD, and so there was a sort of big move away from that, saying like, no, let's not take drugs. Let's just do the meditative practice to open those doors. And now there does seem to be a shift back towards maybe some drugs are okay. In places like Spirit Rock that are letting plant medicine, psychedelic conversation happen in a Buddhist context. So it is happening, and there's a lot of criticism of it, and I think it makes sense for looking at who the founders of our traditions are, and that it came out of the 60s exploration of consciousness, better living through chemistry. Please.
I've been struggling lately with craving for connection and aversion to isolation.
Yes.
And talking to my meditation instructor about it. So, I just think it's like a fundamental human drive and a healthy thing to have connection, like you were talking about, sound good community.
Yeah.
I drove 90 minutes to come here, just like seeking and trying to find resources. But so yeah, I'm working with him, you know, just encouraging me to like try to liberate myself, well, to embrace the suffering that I'm experiencing because of the isolation, you know, like, so I cut out a lot of toxic people in my life, so there's just a few core people left, and then like if I'm struggling or like wondering if there are difficulty reaching out and then not being available, you know, and that's just right how like this sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's been like that for a long time. And so he's like, you know, your work is to let go of your attachment to people for your need for connection, and that's your work. And it just sounds so severe, and I'm really struggling with that. Like, I can accept it to a degree, like knowing that we need to be like, learn to self-soothe and self-regulate and, you know, be self-reliant, and, you know, that ultimately we are walking a singular path, but just side by side. You know, I get that. But just this idea of like sort of just sort of putting myself in a like little mental prison or stripping myself of the need for all human connections seems pretty severe.
Too much. Yeah.
He's trying to like, that's what I'm getting is that like, okay, that seems to be like what's gonna help my situation. I don't know, I just want to see what you're input with.
Maybe if you frame it not as need, but as want. Because need can be a bit of a craving, and we can suffer in that kind of, there's some clinging in. But I want a healthy, supportive, loving community. And I'm willing to put the work in to develop those kind of friendships and those kind of connections. And apparently it's possible to be liberated in isolation. But it's a pretty high bar. And, you know, the Buddha, some of the rules that he made for the monks and nuns were intentional to make people connect. There's a rule about a monk and a monastic can't keep any food overnight. They can't have a refrigerator. So that every single day they have to go in contact and connect with people. That's just the way that it was set up. That one way to look at that is that we do need relationships. We do need contact. Early Buddhism was not about going off into a cave by yourself. Maybe going off into the forest with some friends to meditate together, but always together and close to a village that you could go and have them feed you. So this Sangha is central, and it's one of the refuges, and it's quite central to the Buddhist perspective. And you said it, and I like the way you answered your question. There is the alone together. You have to do all your practice. I have to do all of my practice. I have to learn to care about my pain. You have to learn to care about your pain. I also have to learn to care about your pain. You have to learn to care about my pain, right? It's inner and outer, and we do it alone, internally, together, externally. There is a big difference between feeling like I need someone in specific. I said this to my therapist. Here's overshare. I said to my therapist last year when I was feeling betrayed by the closest people in my life, and she said, it's okay to need them. And I said, it's not okay to need them. I said, I don't need them. And she said, it's okay to need people. I said, I agree, it's okay to need people, but nobody in particular. It can't be them. Like, I can't need this person. I know I need people. We need community. We need people. We need loving, supportive friendships, but not anybody in particular, because if that person betrays you or dies, which is its own betrayal, how dare you go and die? Then there's too much need in someone particular. Of course we need each other. We need people. We need support. We need accountability. We need support. We want that, and we should develop it. It's healthy relationships. So don't go too far and in the kind of like, I have to be completely 100% self-sufficient. I don't think that's healthy. Yes, accountable to ourselves, and yes, accountable and connected with others. Sangha. Yeah. Please.
I got kind of like a two-part question, I
Yeah.
guess. So first thing is that, like, as someone who suffers from like ADHD and severe anxiety and clinical depression at times as well. So one of my initial problems when I first started coming to Samma like years ago was the whole concentration thing. ADHD, like my mind is literally on like 10 different things at one time.
Right.
And it was really hard for me to try to focus on just my breath. And I'd start out focusing in, out, and I'm like 1, 2, 1, 2, in, out, 1, 2, 3, 4, like all over the place. And I spend half the meditation.
Multitasking meditation.
Yeah, I would spend half the meditation trying to figure out which one thing in particular would keep my attention long enough. And like I said, I was out of the practice for a long time, and like just coming back for this first time, like I did the same thing. Like I was like starting from scratch again. Like I would spend half the meditation trying to pick something that could hold my attention long enough for me to get with it. And so that's kind of like I guess a recommendation for something that I could use. And the second part was like I also ran into the issue with like focusing on what's like the whole impermanence thing, because that's like a really big thing. And again, with anxiety and things being impermanent, those two don't really go well together. So when I did finally focus on something, it was like impermanence is like, oh well, that's everything's gonna go away and I can't control any of it. Like you have any recommendations or suggestions for those two? I know those are really big, but
yeah. So for the meditation technique, don't worry about getting concentrated. Let go of the narrow focus on the breath or the technique. Just sit and let your mind do what your mind is doing, and see as clearly, see like, okay, I've got this mind that goes here and there, and come back to your body, but come back gently. We had a guy teach a couple weeks ago, Jason Siff is a friend of mine, a teacher to me. And his instruction to us was, don't do anything. Just sit there. If you're going to do anything, feel your hands on your lap, like Amanda said earlier. Just, you put feel your hands on your lap. And if your mind is wandering, let it wander. And if you get sleepy, let yourself be sleepy. Let yourself fall asleep. And if you're anxious, let yourself be anxious. Quit trying to manipulate or control your experience, is part of what he was saying to us. But just sit there. And then after the meditation is done, reflect on what you noticed, what you saw about your mind after that 30 or 40 minutes. So I want to offer that instruction to you to explore, rather than this Mahasi method, which I'm giving, which is, notes and, get concentrated. Let go of that, because you see how much struggle there is with it. Give it more space. Sit, because probably it makes you not want to sit that much. So maybe if you give it a wider field, the Zen master, Suzuki Roshi, uses this analogy. He says, when you have a stallion and you put it in a really, like a wild, like a bucking bronco, and you put it in a tiny stable, that it's going to be pissed and it's going to kick the sides and it's going to get anxious and agitated. Your mind. But if you take that same wild, unbroken horse and put it in a massive field, it's going to run around for a minute and then it's going to start grazing. It's not going to be so agitated if you give it enough space. So experiment with that in your practice. Give your awareness, just sitting still with your eyes closed is going to do something interesting. Okay. Second piece, I don't know how much I have for it, which is what about anxiety. And I think maybe the first one is both. Make more room for it. It's about impermanence. Make friends with it. Exposure therapy, I don't know, yes, we're, this is what we're in. We're in this impermanent process, and it's fucking scary. And maybe it's the resistance to that reality that makes us more anxious. And so I don't know exactly how to help you to get there, but something about acceptance. I almost feel like death meditation might be, it might fuck with you a bit, but it also might liberate you from that fear, because ultimately that anxiety is like, this might kill me. And if you just turn towards it and be like, yep, I'm going to die. And here I am very much alive. But when we're no longer letting our fear of death make us stressed out or anxious, there can be a way that we can relax into yes, I'm going to die. Eventually, not right now. Right now, I'm very much alive. It might be too much, might be to push it, but I don't know. I know you're back in town, just have returned, and I hope you come sit with us a lot, and then we'll kind of, as we get to know each other, see how to tweak your practice a bit. Thank you. Casey, you want to?
I was going to offer, if I could say something.
Yeah, please.
Someone who deals with anxiety and
Yeah.
avoidance, that the first thing, like you said, is the only thing. The constantly spinning and trying to figure out and connect and realize impermanence is actually, you're just stoking the anxiety, and it's not something that needs to be sought after. It will come to you when you're ready. Right.
So no death meditation right now?
I don't think so.
No. I trust Casey, actually. Casey is also a trained teacher, and he's worked with this for a long time, for over a decade. So make room.
When you said just do the work, the first thing, it was like 100%.
100%.
Just make the space, and the rest of it will happen in its own time.
Yeah. We are out of time. Last word. Don't give me a long question. I can't. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yeah, like Casey, I dealt with anxiety a lot myself, so if it's comfortable, I'll just say that something that helped me make friends with the anxiety so that then I could put it in a big grassy field is something I think I learned in mindful self-compassion, but it was to say to myself, this is only natural that I feel this anxiety right now. It's only human. It makes sense in my humanity, my limited understanding of myself, that I would feel anxious at, for example, the thought of all things being impermanent or the inevitability of suffering. And when I said to myself, this is only natural, this is only human, something got a little softer, and then it allowed me to be in that more spacious awareness with that uncomfortable mind states, inevitable for some of us, more frequent than others.
I like that. I like a lot of what Buddhism does is it just normalizes. It's only human. I like that as a statement. Thank you for your presence and practice and participation. Welcome to everybody that was new tonight, although most of them left early. Class is done by donation. Chris will be at the desk, and there's a bowl there, and if you want to swipe a card, he will help you with that. We suggest a $15 to $20 donation for drop-in class. If you can afford to give more, give more. If you can't afford to give that much, give whatever feels appropriate to you. Everybody's welcome here, regardless of ability to donate, but we do have expenses. So please be generous if you can. And come sit with on Wednesday. Wednesday we do a 40 to 45 minute silent sit where you can just do your own practice. Mondays and Wednesdays are my nights to teach. And Soma and Ward and I are going to start a downtown Los Angeles group on Friday nights against the stream, east side, downtown. Soon, in the next month or so, we're going to start another east side group, downtown group. So if you're at home because you didn't want to drive across town because you live in Silver Lake, we're coming to you soon. And thank you guys for your practice tonight. May any merit that has been developed be shared outward in all directions with all beings everywhere.